Hello and welcome back, and everybody, Levi here. Today I've got a brand new deck tech here for you from a card that came out a little bit early in the year that I kind of was taking a look at. I just recently put a deck together for it. It's Satoru, the Infiltrator, a blue and a black for a 2/3 human ninja rogue with menace. It says whenever Satoru the Infiltrator and or one or more other non-token creatures enter the battlefield under your control, if none of them were cast or no mana was spent to cast them, you get to draw a card. So I think the obvious thing most people think about when you see this commander is Ninja Tribal or Blink. So those are the things I thought when I first saw it. I started to make that deck. I thought, hey, I don't have a ninja deck. I don't really care too much for tribal decks very much, but ninjas are pretty cool, and this is a pretty cool commander for that theme. However, while I was brewing that deck, I thought of the idea for this deck, and I ended up going with this one as opposed to just the regular Ninja Tribal because I thought this one was a little more interesting. So the concept of this deck is somewhat of an Aristocrats deck, but the pieces you're using to get the Aristocrat payoffs is going to be 0-drop creatures like Endless One. Pay X mana for a 0/0 Eldrazi. It says Endless One enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters on it. So what Endless One and several other pieces in the deck, I think I have about 10 cards like this, what they do is they allow you to pay 0 mana into it, get the card draw off your commander, and then immediately die to get the payoff off of some of your Aristocrats pieces and some other payoff cards, which I'll go into in a second. So since there's only about 10 or so 0-drop creatures that immediately die, I decided to throw in a couple other ones that will immediately die, but they won't draw you the card because they don't cost 0 mana. So stuff like Mirror Image, 2 and a blue for a 0/0 shapeshifter. It says you may have Mirror Image enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature you control. What this does is it allows you to copy a creature if you want. If you don't want to, if you just are like right at the end of the game, you just need a couple more triggers off of your Aristocrats, you can choose not to have this enter as a copy of anything. It's a 0/0, so it immediately dies, thus triggering cards like Bastion of Remembrance. 2 and a black for an enchantment. When Bastion of Remembrance enters, create a 1/1 white human soldier creature token, and whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. Classic Aristocrat staple. So obviously we have a lot of cards like that in the deck, but we also have some other payoffs. Stuff like Reassembling Skeleton, 1 and a black for a 1/1 skeleton warrior. You pay 1 in the black to return it from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. What that does is it gets you a card draw off of Satoru because you're not casting it. It's an activated ability that brings it back to the field. So you get a card draw off that. Then you can also sacrifice it to get your payoff for your Bastion of Remembrance type cards and just keep looping that for every extra mana that you have lying around. Very similar to the Reassembling Skeleton, I have Sneaky Snacker, blue and a black for a 2/1 fairy rogue with flying. When you draw your 3rd card in a turn, return Sneaky Snacker from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So in a typical turn, all you do is draw off of the top of your deck for your draw step, you play one of your 0-drops, and then you bring something like your Reassembling Skeleton back that draws you your 3rd card, and then Sneaky Snacker goes back to the battlefield, which draws you your 4th card. So very easy to draw a lot of cards in this deck, plus getting cards in and out of your graveyard triggers stuff like Tormod the Desecrator, 3 and a black for a 4/2 zombie wizard. Whenever one or more cards leave your graveyard, create a tapped 2/2 black zombie creature token. Just great blockers or possibly attackers a little bit late in the game because, we are going for our opponent's life totals with the Bastion of Remembrance style cards. Having little attackers like the zombie tokens from Tormod can really help you close out the game. Similarly to that, I have Desecrated Tomb, 3 mana for an artifact. Whenever one or more creature cards leave your graveyard, create a 1/1 black bat creature token with flying. So very similar. Instead of 2/2s on the ground, you're just making 1/1s in the air. I think the 1/1s are even a little bit better because not everybody's going to have flyers. And since we're drawing so many cards, I threw in some cards like Chasm Skulker, 2 and a blue for a 1/1 squid horror. Whenever you draw a card, you put a +1/+1 counter on Chasm Skulker, and then whenever it dies, you create X 1/1 squids with Island Walk for however many counters were on the Chasm Skulker. So especially in this deck, we're going to be piling tons of counters on this guy. Hopefully a little bit later in the game, we can use one of our sacrifice outlets, something like that, to kill it in case somebody goes to like exile it or something like that, or we just want all the 1/1s maybe right before our turn, sacrifice it, and it has 10 counters or 15 counters or whatever, get all those 1/1s with Island Walk, hopefully swing out on the blue player and probably kill him with that. Similar to that one, I have Deep Sea Kraken, 7 blue, 10 mana for a 6/6 Kraken. However, it gets better. It can't be blocked, which is good. It also has Suspend, 9 for 2 and a blue. So with a suspend like that, you're like, oh man, I'm never gonna be able to play this card. However, whenever an opponent casts a spell, if Deep Sea Kraken is suspended, you remove a time counter from it. So very likely one rotation of the table will take all the time counters off of this, and you can start swinging with it right away. 6/6 that can't be blocked is pretty good value, especially when you have cards like Mirror Image in the deck. You can copy this, then you have another 6/6 unblockable creature, and when it comes into the battlefield, you draw a card off Satoru. So it's just great value. Very similar to that one, I have Nihilith, 4 black for a 4/4 horror with fear, which means can't be blocked except by artifact or black creatures. Also has Suspend, 7 for 1 and a black. Whenever a card is put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, if Nihilith is suspended, you may remove a time counter from it. So similar to the Deep Sea Kraken, those time counters will be coming off pretty fast considering that cards will be going into our opponent's graveyards all the time, so very likely that this can come out pretty quickly. And since Satoru is drawing us so many cards, I didn't feel the need to throw that much extra card draw on the deck, just doing some things that we're already doing, stuff like Morbid Opportunist, 2 and a black for a 1/3 human rogue. Whenever one or more other creatures die, you draw a card, but only once per turn. Similar to that, Midnight Reaper, 2 and a black for a 3/2 zombie knight. Whenever a non-token creature you control dies, Midnight Reaper deals 1 damage to you and you draw a card. Basically with those cards, any ones that we have out, including our commander, we're just gonna be drawing tons of cards. I don't think your hand will ever be empty in this deck, considering what we're trying to do in the deck. And the real meat of the deck, besides the 0 drops, is going to be the recursion. So being able to get our 0 drops back out of the graveyard is really essential, especially with cards like Oversold Cemetery, 1 and a black for an enchantment at the beginning of your upkeep. If you have 4 or more creature cards in your graveyard, which we most likely will, you may return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. So what this does is allow us to reuse our 0 drops every single turn. Just nice to have extra pieces like this that we don't have to pay mana into to get creatures back. They just kind of come back naturally on our upkeep. But there is some cards that we can pay mana into, like Vanewitch Coven, 2 and a black for a 3/3 vampire warlock with menace. Whenever you gain life, you may pay a black. If you do, return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. So really cool synergy with Vanewitch Coven. Say we have our Bastion of Remembrance out, we play our Endless One for 0 mana, it dies, it pings our opponents, and we gain a life. Then you can immediately pay a black and get the Endless One back to your hand, playing it for free, drawing a ton of cards. This is a really cool loop that you can get into with Vanewitch Coven. Kind of similar to that one, we have Nether Trader, black for a 1/1 spirit with haste and shadow. Whenever another creature is put into your graveyard from the battlefield, you may pay a black. If you do, return another trader from your graveyard to the battlefield. Fantastic piece in this deck, especially when you get into the loops with like Vanewitch Coven. Yeah, you're gonna be paying a little bit of mana to do it, but you're gonna be drawing tons of cards, getting a lot of triggers off of your payoff cards. I like cards like this because it lets you loop those things, you know, paying as much mana as you can to just get the engine going. Last one I'm gonna be talking about here for the recursion is Command the Dreadhorde. Super cool synergy with this deck, especially 4 black for a sorcery. Choose any number of target creature and or planeswalker cards in graveyards. So if you wanted to get some creatures out of your opponent's graveyards, you could do that too, but it deals damage to you equal to the total CMC of those cards. Then you put them onto the battlefield under your control. Considering we have lots of 0 drops in our deck, if we happen to get, you know, 5, 6, 7 of them into our graveyard, you could pay 6 mana for Command the Dreadhorde, throw them all back onto the field. They immediately die, getting us a ton of triggers off of our payoff cards. Unfortunately, it'll only get us 1 card draw off our commander because your commander says 1 or more, but still getting a whole bunch of ping damage and card draw and things like that with, you know, Grim Haru specs can really put you ahead, especially only for 6 mana. Just a couple of removal pieces to talk about here. Sinister Concierge up first, 1 and a blue for a 2/1 human wizard. It says when it dies, you may exile it and put 3 time counters on it. It says if you do, exile up to 1 target creature and put 3 time counters on it. Each card exiled this way that doesn't have suspend gains suspend. So the Concierge has to die first, which is pretty easy. We have some sack outlets in here. So you exile it, put 3 time counters on it, and then you can either exile a creature you control to eventually get another card draw off your commander, or you can use it on an opponent's creature, say their commander or something like that, put 3 time counters on it. But most of the time, I think most people will just send it back to the command zone because they don't want to wait 3 whole turns. So really good to take out commanders, or you can just take out some other really key value piece from your opponents. Cool thing about that is the Sinister Concierge comes back and then you can just do it all over again. So really cool removal options. Similarly, I have Riftwing Cloudskate, 3 blue for a 2/2 illusion with flying. It says when it enters the battlefield, return target permanent to its owner's hand, but it also has suspend 3 for 1 and a blue. So if you wanted to do the suspend thing to get another card draw off your commander, you could do it that way, or you could just hardcast it for 5. Last but not least, I have the utility in the deck, just some pieces that don't really fit into other categories, but really help propel the deck forward. Like I was talking about earlier, I have some sacrifice outlets, one of them being Yahenni Undying Partisan, 2 and a black for a 2/2 Aetherborn vampire with haste. Whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, you put a 1/1 counter on Yahenni, which is always nice, but you can sacrifice another creature at instant speed to give Yahenni indestructible till end of turn. So another great card in the deck, Auric Lore Mage, 2 black for a 3/3 human warlock. You can tap it to search your library for a card, put in your graveyard, then shuffle. If it's an instant sorcery, you put a counter on the Auric Lore Mage, which it never will be. We'll be putting one of our 0 drops or something like that into our graveyard. So every single turn, you get to tutor out one of your 0 drops into your graveyard. That way you can recur them with some of your other pieces. And since this is somewhat of a budget deck, I try not to throw in cards that are over like $5-10. So I didn't throw in like Conjurer's Closet or things like that, or Thassa Deep Dwelling. So I tried to find some alternatives to those, and I found Meneldor Swift Savior, 3 and a blue for a 3/3 bird soldier with flying. It says whenever Meneldor Swift Savior deals combat damage to a player, you can exile up to 1 target creature you own, then return it to the battlefield under your control. So what this does, pretty much guaranteed one of your 3 opponents is not going to have a flyer. So, you know, once per turn, you smack somebody for 3 in the air, then you get to blink one of your creatures, getting you a card draw off your commander. Another similar one, not sure how good this one is because I haven't played with it yet, but it seems good. Identity Thief, 2 blue for a 3/3 shapeshifter. Whenever Identity Thief attacks, you may exile another target non-token creature. If you do, Identity Thief becomes a copy of that creature until end of turn, and then you return the exiled card to the battlefield under its owner's control at the beginning of the next end step. So what that does is it blinks one of our creatures, getting us to card draw off Satoru, but we also get to have this become a copy of something else. So if you wanted to have, you know, another Midnight Reaper or something really cool like your Deep Sea Kraken, if you have that out, becomes another 6/6 unblockable creature, which is especially good because Identity Thief has an attack trigger. So you have to attack. Having something like Deep Sea Kraken, making sure it can't be blocked, that way you can use it every turn. Really, really cool value. Last card I want to talk about here, Gisa Glorious Resurrector. 2 black for a 4/4 human wizard. If a creature an opponent controls would die, you exile instead. At the beginning of your upkeep, put all creature cards exiled with Gisa Glorious Resurrector onto the battlefield under your control, and they gain decay. So Gisa doesn't really seem to work into our strategy outside of our commander. You know, if our opponent's creatures would happen to die, you throw them under Gisa, then you put them onto the battlefield on your upkeep. That triggers Satoru, giving you a card draw. Plus, it's just good value to shut down some of your opponents. If they're also playing an Aristocrats deck, you can shut them down with stuff like Gisa. So that's it. That's my idea. That is my Satoru the Infiltrator deck. At first, I was like, I don't know, blue-black Aristocrats kind of been done to death, but I thought this was an interesting enough direction to take the deck. If you wanted to have like that blue-black Aristocrats deck, that's not super similar to all the other ones. I thought this was a pretty interesting commander. If you want to just do the blue-black ninjas, that's also a really cool way to play with this commander. But if you want to check out the full deck list, I have a link in the description down below. Feel free to leave a comment if I had missed anything for this deck. But that is all I have for today, guys. So thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video. All right, take care.